Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations from Stritch. I'm Dave Livingston, President of Lewis University, and again, I am joined by Dr. Christopher Sint, our Provost. It's wonderful to be back with you, and I want to, just say a few words at the beginning, and then we're going to get right into our topic. Our topic today is about athletics. And so we have both our athletic director, Dr. John Planek, as well as two of our coaches who will be joining us today to talk about both what's happening over the summer and what we'll see in the fall. A little plug for next week. Next week we will have Lieutenant Colonel Roman Ortega on with us to talk about internationalization, as well as how Lewis continues to work with our veteran population. We have a lot of veterans at Lewis University, and so we'll talk about how the fall and COVID impacts that population slightly differently in terms of international students and our veterans. As I get started today, all of you, well, I think most of you, some of you are incoming students, but should have just received an email from me. We are commemorating Juneteenth tomorrow as a university by taking the day off of work. I hope you have some time tomorrow to reflect on the final end to slavery in our country and the ongoing struggle that we continue to have with institutional racism across our country, and the way that we as a university are continuing to try to struggle to make our university a place where not only our African American colleagues and students feel safe and comfortable, but a place where everyone is welcome, and that we have the sanctified zone, which we are very proud of here at Lewis. We have had, before we move into the athletics piece, I just wanted to offer Chris an opportunity to talk a little bit. We've had a few questions that come in, and I guess what I would say is generally about classroom policies, I guess is the way I'd put it, as we open up again and move into stage 4. So welcome, Dr. Sint, and maybe you could just speak to briefly about that, and then we'll turn it over to John.
Yeah, thank you, and hello everyone. Great to be here with you again. The questions that have come in, I'm going to put into 3 categories and talk about them each very briefly. One is just generally an update that we continue to refine the fall schedule. It's a very labor-intensive process, and again, thank you so much to our registrar, to our Dean Rapp, who's leading this effort, as well as all of our deans and chairs of departments as they work to consider the new class sizes in our classrooms, the modality of the way we're going to teach each class, as well as the weekly schedule. So we're still refining that, and students will, and faculty are certainly, I know, can contact their chairs for any questions they have as well. And students can, students who have already registered, returning students, will get a message if there's any adjustments to their schedules. We will make every effort to keep the schedule as close to the way it was when they first registered. The second thing I want to mention is that we have got a couple questions about student individuals, especially with who are in at-risk categories. And so similarly, we will do everything we can to accommodate those, or we will accommodate students who are at risk, and that may come in a couple of different forms. It may be an adjustment to the class schedule so that there is more online instruction in that schedule, or it may be an adjustment within the class. So again, continue to communicate with us if you have questions about that, with your advisor and with the other professionals who are working with you on registration, and I know we're working through that with each student. And then finally, the question you asked, I believe, is about, I forget the way you said it, but there's some questions about just sort of what the policies will be and how we will enforce policies and so on. And we don't really know exactly how to explain that yet. We have, as always, we have policies on campus about behaviors that we expect of our employees and our students. And that will be the case in the fall as well. And we will continue to watch the Restore Illinois detail and the advice that we're getting from the CDC and other health organizations, and we will have very specific, concrete policies that are posted and communicated about through all of our sources of communication and our signage, as well as our emails and social media, around what our expectations are for the members of our community when we are entering into the fall semester, just as we are now.
And the good news, Chris, it seems to me overall, is that the Illinois numbers are doing well. It looks like in the next 2 weeks we should be moving into phase 4. Obviously, we're not in charge of that, but I think the behaviors of everybody in Illinois is continuing to keep those numbers in check. That's a very positive sign, and that kind of helps us to shift into what we're really talking about today, which is the return to campus and the return of athletics to campus, which is such a one. I just want to say, I know there's all sorts of different people watching, but to our student athletes, to our coaches, you give us such great pride. Lewis has had an unbelievable record of accomplishment. We have some coaches on today that have had amazing records over their careers. But I'm just so proud also of the balance that our student athletes have between their athletic accomplishments and their academic accomplishments. And that's something that we want to see continue at Lewis. Those of us that no longer can compete because our knees are bad or our lungs don't work as well, we're really enjoy being at your matches, at your games. And so we want to give you, all of you that are watching, the opportunity to kind of hear from our athletic director and hear from some of our coaches about what it'll look like in the fall as we begin athletics at Lewis.
That's great. And so we would like to, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Planek, who is our Director of Athletics, and he will, he has a few updates to give on the NCAA and the GLVC, and then we will go from there. So welcome, John.
Yeah, welcome, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to our audience today and to you. I just want to briefly say that our expectation is that Lewis University will be competing in intercollegiate athletics this fall. Obviously, in the same way that Chris, as provost, is trying to align the Lewis schedules with the CDC, the state of Illinois. We also have those act in concert with the school, following our guidelines that are put forth through the institution. And then we also follow the guidelines and best practices of the NCAA. So just quickly, those slides that I have prepared, and we can just go over those quickly. There we have it right in front of you. And this is just perfunctory in nature, what the nuts and bolts of it. The NCAA too is moving forward to fall start dates, to have those fall start dates start on time. On time being August 17th is when we would be having our students move in for their first fall practices. And then that's pending formal approval of the NCAA. Indications that I've had working in concert with the GLVC, Dr. Livingston, who's part of our President's Council that oversees the GLVC, all indications are that the NCAA is going to look at approval timelines that will stick to this schedule of August 17th. And as Chris and Dave mentioned, hopefully we'll move into the next phase in the state of Illinois. That will help us accomplish a lot of these goals that you see listed here. The NCAA Division II, in an effort to relieve some of the institutions from financial obligations, they did reduce the number of contests in each sport. So you'll see less contests in our sports across the board for this academic year only. NCAA too felt very important. The member institutions felt that if we're going to have a season, that it was important for our student athletes that there would be competition in NCAA 2 championships. So those are going to be currently played as scheduled. Then go to the next slide, please, that would be great. The GLVC is scheduled to complete a regular season conference. So we are going to have a regular season conference for all our GLVC championships that we had in years past. And then we're also going to hold GLVC conference championships in each sport. Next slide relates to Division II. Our coaches are kind of going through a difficult period. You'll see, basketball and especially track. Coach Dana would be out seeing track championships Coach Quigley right now would be engaged in seeing or coming up in July a large number of youth activities at the club level. So a lot of those things have been restricted due to obviously the COVID virus, but coaches are restricted from off-campus recruiting. I will say this, that over the last couple weeks here that we've been back on campus, that we've had a tremendous amount of coaches who are bringing student athletes on campus, and our recruiting efforts this year look really, really solid. We will probably, if all things stay on course, surpass all our target goals, and our coach has been doing a great effort. Like I said, been in here the last week or so, seeing the number of coaches that are interacting with prospective student athletes. And when I see these student athletes on campus, I'm asking, are these for class of 21? And sometimes it's like, no, this guy's a senior. He's thinking of coming to Lewis and he wants to come here this fall. So congratulations to our coaching staff that have really switched gears to a virtual world to ensure that keep engaged with our prospective student athletes and ensuring that Lewis University has a quality athletic program moving forward.
That's great.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead,
I have
Chris.
a few questions just listening to John. So first of all, John, just to follow up with what you were just talking about, some people in our audience might not be familiar with what recruiting is like in the summertime in normal situations. So could you just talk a little bit more about what's different this year and what's the same as usual on the recruiting front?
Yeah, the difficulty, and our coaches maybe can expound on this a little bit, the difficulty this year has been where our coaches aren't given that opportunity to actually see the in-person competition from prospective student athletes. And again, our recruiting, for the most part, I'll speak about track and field usually really depends upon some of our late on state tournaments and state finals. And Dana and James and Nathan haven't been able to get those results and say, hey, this guy won his sectionally, won his regional, he's bursting onto the scene. So it's a lot more fact checking and behind the scenes calls and looking through records that may have been posted earlier in the year. Coach Quigley is this year not being able to be on the summer camps. That probably doesn't really affect this year's recruiting camps, those students enrolling in September, but will affect, hey, I wanted to see this junior, or we have a good beat on this person, or in some instances, they may have committed to us as juniors. We want to go out and see them and cement our relationship. So the inability of coaches to see in-person competition and to get a feel for the person's skills at this level really curtails some of our competition. Now, the good part of that is there are a lot of NCAA schools that are under the same restrictions that we are, but it's definitely changed us back into, like we all are, more of a virtual world for recruiting.
So, John, a couple questions. One that I have, just a clarification question, and then we're starting to get questions coming in, which is not a surprise. I knew this was going to be, a topic that students and parents of our student athletes would be really interested in. So, one question. And I've been involved in these conversations, but I'd love to hear you talk about it. So you talked about the reduced number of contests, and so that means if normally we might have, and I don't know the numbers, is why I'm asking you, 36 basketball games in a season. Is it going down by 10%? That is going down by 3? Is it going down by 20%? So there's going to be 6 less. So is it going from 40 to 30, or is it going from 40 to 38? Just to give people a sense of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's basically, for basketball, you bring up basketball, it's going from, I think, 28 in some provisional games that you could have down to 22. So women's basketball will be 22 games, and the GLVC championship and exhibition games where they can play up to 3 games. So 4, 5, 6 games swing that way. A couple of other sports have hit by, I think baseball is restricted to 40 games now. They were at 50. So there is a restriction there. And again, this is done in an effort to, in this year, reduce expenses for individual institutions.
So in line with that, one of the questions that just came in, I'm guessing from one of our student athletes, is around whether teams will travel out of state for competitions. And maybe you could I mean, all of our student athletes know what the GLVC involves, but will we be traveling, and will we be traveling out of state for competitions as the season progresses?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's the plan. That's the plan across the GLVC. And as I said, Dr. Livingston is on the Council of Presidents that really dictates policy and approves policy from our conference. And again, there's also 320 Division II schools. So we'll take a lot of our cues and best practices from this membership institutions that have 320 schools like Lewis. So the plan is right now, yes, to compete in the GLVC as we've competed in the past. Now, as you can imagine, restrictions on social distancing, number of people in a stadium. For instance, they talked about yesterday on a call that I was in, maybe in volleyball, not to switch sides, the benches. So you get a bench at the beginning of the game and you stay on that side, you switch sides for the court, but not for the bench. So there'll be nuances there, and nuances that we've seen in practice on our campus already, or people that seen of things in general, in social distancing and other things that we're going to implement as an institution. You'll see a carry over that in intercollegiate athletics.
So one more question that just came in, John, and you mentioned it briefly in what you were just saying, is people are interested in fans, and I know there's parents watching this that are very interested in whether they're going to be able to attend a soccer match in the fall, or go to a swim meet or attend a basketball game. So could you talk a little bit about where we're at with that and I know what you just said I think is really important. Guidelines are coming out the end of June. That's the expectation from the NCAA. The GLVC president's group will also weigh in on this. But in terms of what you're hearing from other athletic directors and what you see happening in the fall, do we expect to be able to have fans in the stands?
Yeah, our GLVC, we meet weekly with our athletic directors and our virtually, and what we've seen is that there's obviously social distancing is going to be employed, but there is across the board support for fans in the stands. Obviously, at larger football venues, that becomes more of an issue and more problematic and more problem solving that needs to be that. But as it relates to Lewis University and institutionally, what we would have, we have a large soccer venue. So if we would have to social distance, maybe some of that social distance would be out of the stands. But even if we were in the stands, every other row, families sitting together. Our golf matches obviously could provide social distancing. Cross country certainly could provide social distancing. And then as it relates to our indoor sports as volleyball or basketball, social distancing, things like having every other row available, those people, those family members who have been together, sitting together, and just a smart call as it relates to best practices. We already have additional hand sanitizers on campus. Chris talked about signage being available as you enter an arena of what our expectations are, who and who shouldn't be attending the games. And a lot of this will be programmatic, and the GLVT is looking at game day environments and game management that we think will be universal throughout the league that we should be able to put into place. So those are all things that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. That conversation is ongoing, and I guess I would just say, as Dr. Sin has said so many times in the last month and a half, as we think about bringing classroom experiences back and residential experiences back, it is the balance of our desire to be social and to experience the full range of what college life, university life has to offer, and doing everything we can to provide for public health and public safety for our employees and our students and our fans. So it's going to be complex, and there aren't going to be simple solutions, but we will conform to CDC, IDPH guidelines, and we will give our student athletes the experience that they long for. So, Chris?
I think we should probably invite our coaches on,
Sure.
John, and I will do that. I will introduce Samantha Quigley-Smith, who is the head coach of our women's basketball team, and Dana Schwarting, the men's and women's track and field coach. So I think it would be great if both could come on now.
Oh, there you go.
Hello to both of you. You're
It's
here.
great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome. And
Yeah, thanks for giving us the opportunity to be here.
we really,
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
yeah, we really just wanted to see you and say hello, but we will ask some questions. So I guess I'll start. Maybe Sam, you can go first. Just thank you so much for everything you're doing. And John mentioned a little bit about what summers are like for head coaches, but could you just talk a little bit about what you're doing this summer and how it's different than a normal summer?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of this really started for us in the springtime, once everything began to be shut down and, from a recruiting standpoint, really changed our whole methods of what we normally do starting in the springtime and now going until the school year starts. So a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of face-to-face talks like we are now on a, some sort of or iPhone FaceTime. And yeah, it's definitely different. And also just to have conversation with our current student athletes, whether that was a Zoom meeting that we have weekly, and talking and just getting to know some of the players that are coming in, where you really potentially be having things on campus and meeting face to face. So definitely a different world now in that change, but really positive, I think, mindset going into the fall, trying to keep all of our student athletes informed as we become informed, and just from an all-around safety and positive standpoint, on the right foot. We're excited to be back on campus.
Great. Dana, how about you? How was your summer and what are you up to?
It's definitely been unprecedented. We talked to my coaching staff, and usually in the spring we're on a bus every weekend, traveling around the Midwest, going to meets and going to high school meets, and being able to interact with all the high school seniors and juniors that we're recruiting, and just not being able to have any interaction with our team and with the recruits that we're looking at has been a challenge. I don't know if you can hear me. I can't hear myself now.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you just fine. You're great.
So it's been this is my 18th season. I just finished up at Lewis, and it was strange not to be going to meets and being at track meets and having the daily interaction with the student athletes, which is what we get in for, is those relationships and the day-to-day practices and struggles and stuff that we get to do on a day-to-day basis. And not being able to do that is really, really odd. But we've had a great recruiting class. We've had to recruit sight unseen with a lot of recruits. We haven't been able to evaluate as much and get them to campus and meet parents and the family. So that's been a little odd. We're going to have to spend a lot more time in the fall to actually know some of these incoming freshmen and transfers, and working through that. Not being able to give the same type of workouts to our student athletes over the summer, knowing that weight rooms and gyms and places they usually work out are not open, and they're having to do a lot more stuff on their own. We're going to have to change a little bit of how we go about things in the fall, because we're going to have to evaluate what shape some of the athletes are in and make sure we're not overloading them and getting people injured. So that's going to be a lot different. I think we'll be very excited to see the student athletes again in person on campus, and they'll probably be very excited to see us and just get that daily interaction again, which is what we really crave and we really want as coaches and humans. We want to be around other people and interact, and it'll be nice to get back to normal.
Yeah.
Hey, do you have, because I have a couple questions that have come in, but you probably have
no,
some
go
things.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, and this is maybe for John, maybe more for John and Sam, just because it's connected in a different way. So the question, and I think the way it's asked, it's probably from a parent, but the specific question is, you can't socially distance in soccer as a game, so how do you keep them safe? And I guess, John, maybe for you, you could speak to those contact sports, but Sam, you must be talking to other coaches and thinking about, obviously, again, this balance. You care about your athletes so much. We can hear that in what you're saying, Sam, and in what you're saying, Dana. So we certainly don't want them to get sick, but I think it's a fair question for a parent to ask about, soccer and basketball when people are bumping into each other constantly. Talk a little bit about what athletic directors and coaches are thinking about, the way they're talking to their players, maybe even the way you're talking to prospective families as you're recruiting in light of COVID-19.
Well, I'll start out and say that obviously, as you look towards on a national level, you think of the sport of football, a lot more contact there. So we'll take some cues from the NCAA from that as it relates to contact. We also have our athletic trainers. We just had a call before this, a whole staff call. Our athletic trainers, every athletic trainer at GLVC is on a phone call right now. This is multiple phone calls about protocol, testing, hand sanitizing, protocol for things to do at practice, before practice, after practice, social distancing in locker rooms, social distancing in weight rooms, locations of training tables and training rooms. I was on a call yesterday of mitigating infections spread in the NCAA. So there's a number of things that we do. We obviously cannot stop. You know, I jokingly said that, you know, there's going to be a 6-foot social distancing in soccer. And one of our coaches said, "Are you serious?" I said, "No, I was just joking. It can't be a 6-foot social distance in soccer because nobody will be covering anybody." So there's going to be soccer as we know it. But there obviously will be keeping track of temperature checks. A screening will be done every day for every student athlete about symptoms, how they feel, temperature checks. So we'll have a very rigid protocol, making sure that those students, once they're on our campus and under our health care, that we'll be checking in on them, checking up with them, and making sure that the best practices are used. But there will be contact in soccer. There will be soccer games and basketball games where there'll be full contact. So, you know, the onus will fall on our athletic training and our medical staff to make sure that we're putting them in the best position to adhere to public safety guidelines, NCAA guidelines, and best practices. No doubt different from years past, but all good things that will help us, you know, in general too. So we talk about mandating a flu shot for this year, something that we've looked at in the past. And a lot of the practices that we talk about, not sharing water bottles, not sharing water fountains, not sharing food, not sharing towels, are things that we've put in practice as just best practices from our safety practices and hygiene in the past. Our coaches, we're working with our trainers, about 90 to 95% of the things that we'll have in place are good hygiene practices if we weren't in a pandemic or we were in a pandemic. Now, there's other provisions that we have to heighten awareness, but a lot of these things are just good practices in general, as we've seen from the epidemic in general. Covering your mouth, having face coverings, not sneezing or coughing in anybody's face, not hanging out with other people and things like that where you'd be in close contact. So a lot of these things that we've already had up on the board, it's just to be a little bit more regimented with a couple things that we really have to look at to enforce.
And Sam, how about you? I mean, and I'm not trying to dismiss Dana, but I just feel like you inherently in basketball, it's a contact sport. So could you talk to me a little bit about, you know, maybe even you could share some additional questions you might be getting from recruiting families, or some of the, you know, a mom or a dad that might call you up and say, you know, how are you going to take care of my daughter during practice, during games? So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things is our communication with our training staff. That has been, you know, something that's on a constant conversation every week in terms of what is going to be the protocol for the fall. But just being a leader of, you know, the 16 women that I'll be coaching, I think it's really important for us to control the things that we can control. So whether that is, you know, the hand sanitizing prior to practice, after practice, as we're literally leaving the gym, wiping down basketballs, these are all going to be things that are going to be very important to what it is that we're doing from a health and safety standpoint. And really not a lot, like John said, not much different than what we've done in the past when it came to, you know, if someone had the flu on our team or any other kind of sickness. Now it will be a heightened awareness, I think, and daily protocol things that we'll be doing to help keep everybody safe. And I think, you know, if we're going to be playing basketball, there's only so much we can control. From a contact standpoint, I think it's very difficult to play basketball without contact. But one thing our trainer mentioned earlier today, which I thought was was really wise. You know, when our student athletes first arrive on campus, I think just focusing on those first couple weeks, not necessarily just jumping into the sport of basketball. You know, maybe it's a little bit more of conditioning. You know, we're kind of keeping ourselves a little more socially distant, you know, rather than jumping into a 5-on-5 game, you know, when our student athletes have just come from home or a different state or a country. So I think that's been a big thing for us, just listening to our training staff, you know, and the health protocols that we know we need to keep in place on a day-to-day basis. This is going to be something that our student athletes will be aware of. You know, in terms of our communication, we've already talked to our student athletes a little bit about just being prepared mentally. I think that's one advantage that we have going into the fall. You know, we are mentally prepared for things, and we are a little bit more ready than maybe we were in the spring when it was shooting up on ESPN. You know, now we're going to be a lot more prepared for what it is that we're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Dana, do you think you could just maybe add to that a little bit in terms of just how, when you're preparing for the year, in terms of practices and you know, just any adjustments that you might be making in track and field?
Yeah, I will say, you know, I'll back what they say. We're already kind of doing that, you know, with the flu, with MRSA, with, you know, meningitis and things that we're trying to always worry about. And we're going to be more hypersensitive. And I would say most college athletes are hypersensitive to their body and their aches and pains and sickness anyway. So they, you know, they jump on things when they feel their first, you know, onset of anything that feels a little bit off. And we just have to keep making them aware that, you know, if you don't feel good, don't come to practice that day. Stay in your room, you know, give yourself 24 hours to see if it, you know, if it gets worse. Or, you know, we have right now we'll have 115 to 120 total track and field athletes. So we're juggling a lot more people and personalities and stuff that we're going to have to be aware of. And in track and field and cross country, we're able to, you know, keep a little bit more social distancing. But when we're on the indoor track, a little small field house with 120 people in there, there's still going to be a lot of people, you know, elbow to elbow on the track doing workouts and stuff. And, you know, we just have to be aware, and we have to keep educating the student athletes that, you know, if you feel sick, don't come to practice this day, you know, go to the student health. If it's anything that feels out of ordinary, you know, catch it right away. And that's just a good practice year in and year out anyway. And again, when you're riding on a bus, you know, 54 people crammed into a charter bus, you're sitting, you know, on top of each other basically, and that happens yearly for us. So it'll just be being a little bit more vigilant this year than normal, and hopefully we won't have any major issues. And you also got to think that the college athletes are some of the healthiest in shape people in society, so they should have a much higher immune system to begin with, most of them. So a lot of them, you know, hopefully it won't be an issue. But again, we'll deal with it as it comes. And like Sam said, we'll be a little bit more prepared and know what we're up against, whereas last year it kind of just hit us.
That's great. I have many questions that have come in. So let me just try to do these relatively quickly. Will athletes wear masks in competition?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I don't believe that is something, if an athlete feels that they want to wear a mask or they feel that that's necessary, we certainly would stop them from wearing it. But my indication where I've seen professional teams or other teams working out is that during that sessions that they're competing, that they would not be wearing a mask. However, if they want to wear a mask, we would not say that you couldn't wear a mask. And if they were doing a workout and they felt that that's something they wanted, we would permit them to do that.
And this might be also for you, John, and Chris. So somebody's asking about contact tracing if an athlete becomes sick. So will we as a campus be doing contact tracing, not only for our student athletes,
Right.
if they become sick, but any student?
Yeah, we will. We'll have contract tracing in place, and we'll work with the athletic trainers are part of the team that's leading that effort, so that it will all be interconnected.
Great. So then another set of things is, I'm going to put a few things together which are around facilities. So will the weight rooms be open? You know, will we be able to use the normal facilities, changes to training rooms? John, you mentioned some of that at the beginning, but my assumption is that when athletes show up on campus first week, they'll be able to get into the weight rooms.
Yeah, that's correct. We will try to restrict activities in the weight room. Our weight room is not a large weight room, so we will have team activities, but we'll remind, there'll be signage and social distancing. There may be some people that'll have to do work outside, their workout outside of the weight room area that we'll have. We'll ask teams to space out better. Same thing in our athletic training room. We're reminding students that let's not hang around in the athletic training room if you're not getting treatment. If you are getting treatment, get your treatment and leave the training room. We'll have social distancing signs in there and, and a number of things that we'll put in line for best practice. Those facilities will be open, and we'll be cognizant of the fact that we're under a new normal and heightened awareness to social distancing.
And next week, we're going to be talking about international students, so maybe this can go over, but there is a question on here about whether international athletes are going to have any additional restrictions that a athlete from, suburban Chicago or Michigan has.
Yeah, that's a great question. We covered this in our athletic director's phone call yesterday, our athletic training phone call this morning. For those student athletes that are international students, first, we hope that their particular country, their particular embassy, their particular immigration permits them to come into the United States at a time will that permit them to compete in intercollegiate athletics. Obviously, we do not have control of the immigration process, and if the country is closed or forbidding travel, we're not going to be able to intercede on their behalf. But if an international student, we're still working this out. It looks like they're going to have to be on our campus 2 weeks prior to the start of intercollegiate athletic competition or quarantine for 2 weeks. So for instance, that August 16th date, we are now formulating, Chris is involved in this, I'm involved in a number of campus discussions, formulating strategies for those international students who are fall athletes and can get back into the States without restrictions to their travel, would be quarantined on campus for 2 weeks. That's what we're looking at right now and trying to work through those dynamics.
That's great.
So it is a little bit different from somebody who's on the north side of Chicago and maybe returning to campus. That's what we're looking at for our international students right now and how they would get back into our rostered spots.
And then we also have a couple questions about testing. So Chris or John, is there going to be any additional testing for athletes? Will they need to be tested if they get sick? Will they have to be tested before they can come back to practice? Will they be tested on a regular basis? I know it's been talked about, but I guess I'm just wondering where you think we're at right now.
I'll start with that, John. I think it's really premature to say anything definitive about that. We will do testing as much as we can and with what's available at the time. And right now, I'm feeling very optimistic about that as testing becomes much more available in the region. And so I don't know if, John, if you're hearing more about that, but we don't have a protocol in place today because we're not sure what will be available in August.
Mm-hmm.
We've looked at a number of dynamics as it relates to testing and protocol that's in place, and we're still developing that, similar to what Chris mentioned. Obviously, we think that if a student athlete at some point during their competition is presenting symptoms of the COVID virus, and we would have them tested and removed from our team, obviously. But we don't have any policy right now as it relates to overall testing or testing of each individual student athlete. That is being discussed, other presenting signs and how they would be tested, who would be doing the testing, where the testing would be done. Those are things that I think that as the university talks about them in the same way, the Intercollegiate Athletic Department, and trying to get some policy. I think, again, GLVC, the NCAA will help us formulate strategies and best practices because we're competing against these other teams that will be under similar protocol.
So we may want to just have this person follow up because they might have additional questions, but it may be the same student, international student asking the question during their 14-day quarantine, will they be able to do anything related to athletics? And my assumption is this is about, can I train? If I'm in quarantine, does that mean I'm, kind of stuck in my dorm room for 14 days, or I just have to social distance in a different way? So I don't know if we have that all figured out. But I guess the other thing I would say is we will be communicating with all of our international student athletes and all of our international students for those of you that are on right now as international student athletes, you might want to also be on next week, because next week we're going to be talking about internationalization in general and our international students. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, John, in terms of what that'll look like for that athlete?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, David. You're absolutely correct. Those students will be getting updates from their coaches, general international students from our international students here on campus. We meet weekly as a coaching staff, and we've met weekly since the middle of March. So every time there's an update as it relates to what's going on in the NCAA, the GOVC, and Lewis University, we update our coaches. We just had conversations about our international student athletes and those international student athletes that may be precluded from traveling out of their country. Each individual coach has, those coaches that have international students, I think the best thing to do is as we get closer to our dates, and if there's some questions that those individual student athletes ask their specific coach, because our coaches are updated and they have the same information that our athletic trainers have and that I have.
That's great. So, Chris, do you have additional questions? That for either Dana or Sam?
I guess one question on my mind, John, that I've heard from others is in your initial presentation, you mentioned that the NCAA championships would continue. Are they, when they're talked about now, are they similar to what they've been in the past for each sport, or are they modified in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, the NCAA is planning on having championships conducted similar fashion they've had in years past.
Okay.
That's great. Well, as we wrap up, I'd love to hear any, either you have an opportunity. So Sam and Dana, if you want to say hello to your athletes or say anything you want, any closing remarks from all three of you, we'd love to take those in turn. So Sam, any closing remarks?
I would just say, just like we have communicated to our own individual team, I think this athletic department is very much a team, and so constant communication and talking, about our situation coming in the fall. And it's very positive, feedback, communication in terms of what we're going to be doing and the direction we're going to be going, with also the factor in place. So I want everyone, I think, to know that we're in constant communication and that we're going to keep our student athletes as safe as we possibly can, at the same time giving them a phenomenal experience. And so it's going to be something that aligns together, and us have been a big part of making sure that it happens for our student athletes from a safety standpoint. So thanks for tuning in. Our players and our student athletes from women's basketball are probably like, great, we get to see her on the camera again.
Yeah, they see you all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us and joining us, Sam, and sharing your insights. Dana?
I would just say, whether you're a student, whether you're a student athlete, you got to prepare like there's going to be a normal. And, whatever the normal becomes, you'll adjust to it, but you got to do the preparation. And the summer is a big time when you're getting ready for that. You can't wait until the last minute to try and, get ready or do your classes or decide you're going to come back. Just prepare like it's going to be normal. And in whatever situation we're handed as we get back to normal, whatever adjustments we have to make, you'll be in a good position to be able to make those. But again, just start preparing. And it's hard because you have to be self-motivated, and you're having less, people to talk to you and motivate you and keep you going. You got to be doing a lot more stuff on your own. But that's just going to, show who the true self-motivated students and student athletes are, and they're the ones that are going to come back and have the most success. So if you're watching and you're a track athlete, cross-country athlete, get back to work. Hopefully we'll be there for you when you get on campus, and we'll hit the ground running.
That's great. John, any last closing comments?
Yeah, I would just want to say that the work of our coaching staff over this period has been outstanding. As we went into this period, we have discussions about recruiting. Where are we going to be at? Are we going to hit some of our targeted goals? Are people interested in Lewis? What has this meant to us? We've gone above and beyond. We've surpassed our goals. We've surpassed our targeting. And our coaches really have worked harder at this time period than they have in the past because of all the obstacles in their way that this has been presented to them. But I think that what we'll see, and hopefully all of our admissions and everybody that's talking about coming to Lewis and has interest in us, and all those recruits pan out. But I just want to take a moment to thank our coaching staff to be so engaged with the recruiting process and their current student athletes during this very difficult time. Just been outstanding. We've met more in the last 3 months than we probably met in the last 2 years as a staff, constantly updating and trying to figure out, similar to what yourself, David, and Chris are doing. I know the number of virtual calls, Zooms, WebExes, Teams, and our coaches are doing the same thing, trying to stay on top of this. And I congratulate and applaud them because it's been a difficult situation. We really want to get to the other end where we're kicking a soccer ball, we're serving a volleyball, we're sprinting down the track, and we're shooting a basketball. All of our coaches, they live for those moments in competition, as do our student athletes, and really looking forward to a return.
Thank you so much, John. So well stated. Chris, any closing comments you want to make?
Yeah, just thank you to John for his leadership, and it's always inspiring to be around our coaches, and so it's been a pleasure for me. And our coaches are just leaders and teachers in our community, and it really it's nice to be reminded of that today. And also, I just want to say that our student athletes are leaders on our campus. And I'm so excited at the thought that of August 17th rolling around and having our student athletes back on campus to help us. We need those leaders right now, so it's great that they're going to be back.
We certainly do, and you know, it's interesting to kind of watch this cascade up, because I want to say thank you to you, Chris, because you lead. You know, you work with John, and John, of course, works with the coaches, and I'm so proud of all of our, you know, coaches and trainers and everybody that actually, you know, all the people that are cleaning the facilities and making sure that the equipment gets moved. You know, there's hundreds and hundreds of pounds of weights that probably need to be shifted 5 feet over so it's safe. There's just so many people on this campus that I am grateful for all the work that they do. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, John. I really appreciate Sam and Dana joining us today, and all the other coaches. Just a couple closing comments. One more thank you to John, and Joe, who are behind the wall. Oh, I got shut off. No, I'm
still
back
here.
Thank you to John, and Joe for all their work on this. We are excited, very excited to have everybody back. Just want to restate very clearly that, as I've said almost every time, the balancing act here is between making sure that everybody on our campus, our students and our employees, are safe and are healthy, and that we offer them an experience, which is excellent educational experience that prepares them for a really powerfully meaningful life that comes out of being in community at Lewis University and being in association with each other to make this world a better place. So I am grateful to all of you. I'm excited, very excited to have everybody back on campus as we prepare for August. And I welcome you to join us again next week. We will have Lieutenant Colonel Roman Ortega on to talk about internationalization and the international community, as well as our veterans and how this is impacting them. Once again, thank you, Chris, for joining me, and thank you all, and many, many blessings. We are always in the holy presence of God, and we are grateful for that. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week.